Welcome back. Now, finance houses are coming around to the fact that there's probably very little risk attached to financing a classic car. It's not difficult to see why either. A classic car has a high probability of appreciating and is generally a sound investment for the buyer. In studio, we have with us Roy Limbeek, the MD of Classic CarSource. Thank you so much, Roy, for making the time. Now, I want you to take Thandi Sizwe out of his daydream. He seems to think that his Chrysler light, neon light, qualifies as a classic car. What's exactly a classic car? And let's make sure that this guy knows that he doesn't fit in that category.
Okay, a classic car is anything basically that varies through the years 1920s through to mid 80s, roughly. So I deem a classic car to be anything in that kind of a range. You obviously get vintage within that, you get classic within that, and you get collectibles within that as well.
How do we define those?
Yeah.
A classic, vintage, a collectible.
Certain year periods, certain eras that you would obviously then classify them to be.
And who's
classics
buying
or
classic
vintage.
cars in South Africa? The typical profile of your buyer?
I'd say people that generally have got businesses, that have got money to actually, that can afford to buy classics and collectibles. So it's normally your mid to high end of kind of a client that normally can buy.
In reality, Roy, so I drive this old Chrysler. I love it. I think it's a classic. My brother agrees that it's a classic.
We could debate that.
Now, you know, I struggle to fix it. I have to wait days, weeks to get certain parts to fix it.
Yeah.
It needs a little bit of fixing every month, every second month. It needs a little bit of touch here and there. Now, if I'm going to buy a 1920 car, chances are, if something breaks, you will have to phone the creators or the manufacturers to say, I need that steering rack.
Yeah.
How do I get around those things? Is that a concern that is valid?
It is kind of, but in certain cases, I mean, a lot of guys, I just had a client the other day speaking to me with regards to a vehicle that it's also a current vehicle. And he went to the dealership and he asked them, listen, this needs fixing and that needs fixing. And they said to him, okay, we can get all the parts for you and that. You're looking at about 2 to 3 weeks waiting period. So he actually went overseas himself, ordered the parts, and he had them here within the week. So you got to be very proactive. You know, you generally the classic car guys are always proactive. So if you need a part, you're going to go and find it.
So you have to have lots of money to be able to fly to...
Well, sometimes the pricing ends up being cheaper than sticking to the
apart
local
from getting
guys.
the parts, how easy is it to get financing for a classic car or a vintage car?
Financing on the financing side, I'm not part of the financing. Most of my clients that have bought vehicles from me tend to pay cash. So it's not something that has to go that often through the financing side. But the major banks generally do look at it, and they obviously look at valuations and things that got to go with it. So it works hand in hand.
What would be the average price? I mean, we watch a lot of movies and these things go for millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Looking at a South African case.
You got various prices. I mean, you got your entry level kind of vehicles that you can buy, anything from about 30,000 Rand through to 3 million, whatever your budget is.
So what do you typically see are the most popular option that people are going for out there?
You get a lot of people that seem to be going for the muscle cars, which is the boomy V8s, which I love as well. So your Mustangs typically, Ford Thunderbirds, Fairmont GTs, those kind of cars. So
where does a Chevy fit in?
Chevy,
I know Chevy.
Chevy Impalas, that will also fit
Okay.
into that kind of a market.
So
yeah,
once you've
muscle
got the
cars.
car, whether you financed it or you bought it cash with a little bit of change, right, that's lying around, how difficult is it to insure this now very attractive asset?
Look, insurance-wise, there doesn't seem to be a problem. There's enough insurance companies out there that seem to not have a problem with getting a valuation on the vehicle and insuring it. The client at the end of the day is a different kind of a person in that they're normally enthusiasts and they're looking after their cars. So guys will look after, pamper their cars, take them to shows. It's a totally different clientele.
Talking about valuation, let's look at that valuation. Who values a classic car? Is there some institution that says this range of cars or this range of classic cars are valued at this amount of money? Can I, as a buyer, actually urge you that it's not worth the amount of money that you are, offering to me?
It's very difficult. I mean, that's one of my aspects in my business that I do. We go and value the vehicles and do assessments and everything. And it's very difficult. One person could take a Chevy, for example, a Chevy Impala, and he could do the basics on it, keep it stock standard, and the value on that vehicle will be a certain amount. But you could get the guy that converts that same Chevy into like a hot rod, and he throws more money at it, and at the end of the day, the one could be worth 200,000 and the other one could be worth $500,000.
Let's talk about if you wanted to get rid of this particular asset, how difficult is it to sell a classic car? You can't just walk in and trade in like we usually do, right?
Yeah, no, you're used to doing that with a modern car, but with a classic it's a little bit more difficult. You'd most likely have to sell it privately, or you'd have to then maybe look at going to a dealer to sell it on your behalf, or maybe you could buy something else and also trade in, but you'd have to do that with a specialized dealer.
You mentioned buying privately. I mean, how would you recommend people go about acquiring a classic car? I mean, how many approved classic dealerships are there out there?
I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure how many guys are around.
What is the industry like at the moment in terms of demand and supply?
The industry has definitely picked up over the last 2-3 years. It has definitely picked up. So there are quite a few vehicles around, and there are quite a few buyers around.
Do we import these vehicles, or are they already in South Africa?
Here. They're already here, yeah.
So on that note of classic cars, we're going to wrap this conversation and thank Roy so much for clarifying some of the ambitions of my co-host sitting next to me, who seems to think he has a multi-million rand classic car. That's Roy Limbeek from Classic CarSource. Time now for us to see what's our Befriend the Trend. Now, the Befriend the Trend for today is the demand of super temps is on the increase. Now, Tanya Caesar, when I think, and Jessica as well, when I think super temp, temp in general, I think of a secretary just for 3 months or a 6-month period. I'm not really thinking executives and strategists and these kind of guys. How's the profile of the super temp changed?
Well, you're exactly right. We think of temp as somebody who goes in and works a week or two at maybe a hairdresser or something like that. But that profile really has changed, especially in Africa, where we're seeing new businesses open up. There's explosive growth, and there's a demand for executives and management consultants and people to come in on a project basis. And more so, people are eager to take on that kind of work. And there are different things driving that. One of the things is technology. I mean, mobile technology is making it very easy to work from anywhere. And instead of having to travel up to Ghana or Kenya, you can just do a Skype call. So it's actually, technology is enabling it. And there's also an attitude towards being a long-term contractor or being a salaried employer. The attitudes are changing. People no longer need to be with the same employer for 10, 15 years. They're realizing there are multiple benefits to being flexible. And for the companies, there are also benefits as well. They don't have to have somebody on a salary. They don't have to pay benefits. So it really is a trend, and the trend is being driven from the States, where they say in 2020, more than 40% of the workforce will be considered contingent workers.
Right.
So it's really something that is becoming a reality. And I think in South Africa, with the rise of mobile technology, it's definitely becoming an attractive option for both sides.
How important is it to have, especially looking in the context of companies adopting an African expansion strategy, how important is it to have a super temp from that particular geography, or is this advancement of technology just ruling that expectation null and void?
It's an interesting question. I think people are realizing that there's benefits to having people inside the country who have local knowledge and they have the local contacts, blending that with outside expertise who can bring in perhaps the additional knowledge from more developed markets. And I think using those two sort of circles of knowledge together is what companies want to do. They want to optimize both.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, because in South Africa, when there was this, boom of expanding into Africa, a lot of the companies just simply thought, because they have all the systems and all the deep pockets, they could simply go there themselves, try and do things and actually make them work. Often they would normally take a South African approach and go to a country in Africa and simply say, this approach works in South Africa, there's no way it's not going to work here. And a lot of them have actually got their fingers bent so hard that they actually had to pull back. So a lot of them are now waking up to the fact that actually you need the people that understand the culture, that understand the people, that understand the attitudes to be able to sell a particular product or service. So if you have those super TAMs, they're not necessarily, permanent employees in your payroll. They can work in their own time as long as they know when to deliver.
So we're definitely befriending this trend, it sounds like it.
Absolutely. I think even if you are someone who's, obviously looking for a job, these are some of the ways you can actually position yourself. And let's say, I'm looking for a permanent employment. You can say, I am a super temp. I can do A, B, C, and D. I'm happy to work for you when you need a particular service.